Hello and welcome to the In the Beginning podcast. This week we spoke to McGraw about his book Ravage, Apocalypse of Wolves, and how he kept the popular theme of werewolves fresh. If you missed my introduction to Apocalypse of Wolves or would like a refresher before the discussion, head back to episode 41. I'd like to take a moment right now to thank McGraw for his patience. McGraw submitted his story many months ago, and I quickly scheduled it for October. So he's had to wait. But I mean, how could you not schedule a post-apocalyptic story about werewolves for the last week of October? Well, second to last week of October. So thanks again, McGraw. Another side note, Marie's come down with a cold, so you're going to be hearing a lot of Ben today. I will do my best to do this as a one-person show. Hopefully I won't have to do it that many more times. As always, this discussion episode is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Shirts by Sarah. Stop by shirtsbysarah.com and find the shirt that brings out the Halloweener in you. Normally we talk about how we felt about the book, so I'm going to start by saying I truly did enjoy this book. It's fast-paced. You're flopped right into a world that's already been ravaged by wolves. Pun intended. Pun not intended. But it's already established. The characters are already there. This has been going on for a while. There's no need to lead up to it. Everything gets revealed slowly as you go along. No need for that 3-chapter introduction to how the world became the way it was. On our ACM Books webpage, Ashley posted, "Woo, action-packed start. Wouldn't want to find myself face to face with a team of these wolf soldiers, that's for sure. Such interesting characters. Neat to see how they interact as a team." And Paul said this book moves quickly. The pacing reminds me a lot of a graphic novel or maybe a video game. It works well and lends to an urgency to the plot. I also like how we arrive in a world sometimes after the apocalypse, and it feels established and lived in. He also mentions that there's plenty of cross-references throughout. He particularly enjoyed a line similar to the one uttered by Hicks in Aliens. There's also a scene not dissimilar to American Werewolf in London, which I haven't gotten to these yet, or maybe they just went over my head. But I'm sure I'll get to him later on. One downside that Paul mentions, and we delve into later on in this episode, is that Apocalypse of Wolves does not have any chapter breaks. I like chapter breaks as they give me something to aim for when I'm reading. He's a traditionalist. The text does have natural pauses, so it sort of has breaks built in. So there's not really any story breaking. We asked McGraw, how do you keep a story fresh and new with a topic such as werewolves?
Well, let's look at that one in a little more depth. The inspiration for the subject matter of my Ravage series was a British indie horror film called Dog Soldiers. Great watch, by the way, and that's where the slang term for werewolf dog soldier comes from, why the setting's in England with predominantly British characters. So Neil Marshall, the director, essentially made a unique spin on those zombie movies where a bunch of survivors are stranded in a house and surrounded by zombies because it's a squad of soldiers on a training mission that ultimately get trapped in a farmhouse and hunted by werewolves. I then kind of thought about how much more dire things could get in a similar situation while keeping werewolves as a starting point, and then I realized that A, Neil Marshall's movie was a unique retelling of classic zombie horror, albeit with werewolves instead of zombies, and B, there have been several types of apocalypse stories with different creatures. There's a million zombie apocalypse. The recent Planet of the Apes film reboot series is essentially an ape apocalypse, and alien invasion stories like War of the Worlds and Independence Day are pretty much alien apocalypse, but there's never been a widespread outbreak or horde of werewolves in fiction, at least to the best of my knowledge. So true, my story sort of falls in line with those other apocalyptic tales because it's a story about an apocalypse that ravages society, but it has a different antagonist that changes things because you can shoot your way through zombies, apes, and aliens, but werewolves will soak up your bullets and laugh before killing you in the most brutal way possible. And as a safeguard to make that premise unique, I wanted to stay true to werewolf lore and mythos, and obviously the first thing everybody thinks of when you think of werewolves is a full moon with silver bullets as a close second. It'd be entirely illogical to make the claim that society was ripped apart in the course of 8 hours by creatures that would vanish at dawn. So then I, out of nowhere, got the idea, well, if there's werewolves, then supernatural elements are obviously at play. At that point, the idea of having two warring spiritual beings that are yin and yang, good and evil, otherwise total polar opposites, enter my head and seem to me like a reasonable solution as long as we're at least kind of elaborated on a little bit, which I feel like it is a serviceable job doing. One spirit believes that humanity is divine, one spirit believes it should be wiped out and born anew in its own image, and then this war between two divine beings takes place between the champions, humanity versus werewolves, to see which one deserves to inherit the earth.
This is such a great response. It has so many levels to it. It starts out talking about how he's inspired by the film Dog Soldiers. It gave it the setting and the slang. But this answer goes into like how you create a story and how you come up with an idea, and then that idea may just like get pushed away because, oh well, if I do this then I have to do that. And with McGraw, if he created a werewolf story that was also supposed to be post-apocalyptic, how did he get around the fact that they were going to become humans every day? Well, poof, an eternal full moon. Which, when I started reading the story, I thought the story was based on the eternal full moon, and then everything else came from that. It was just kind of neat to see that I was wrong about his inspiration. One of the downsides that I had in the book, which his answer you're about to hear changed, is he named every single weapon, and there was a reason behind every single weapon. And you've heard Maria and I speak in the past about how you can say the exact type and style of a car, but I'm still going to picture the same green car I've always picked. So that's what I was doing with these weapons, is I was picturing just generic weapons in the soldier's hands. So with that in mind, I asked McGraw, there are many weapons used in the beginning of the story, and you do a great job of differentiating characters with weapons. I wondered, was this character-based or possibly inspired by the popular first-person shooter-style games that are all out right now? Or possibly both?
I love this question. No, none of my characters are based on video game characters. However, their weapons were due to my natural passion for gaming, and their choice of firearms reflect this. I'll explain that in a second. To me personally, I see firearms as forms of art. I don't necessarily view what they're capable of doing to people as art, but it's only when you start playing video games that you start realizing there's more to guns than just pistol, shotgun, and assault rifle, more than just AR-15 and AK-47. In certain cases, by which I mean two, I picked obscure weapons that actually have some sort of connection with their wielders. Poet, for example, is a born sniper and handles sniper rifles with ease. With the best presence she gets in the story being a German-made GOL or GOL sniper Magnum. It's a very rare rifle that's custom-made per order, so they aren't exactly flooding the market. And it's incredibly accurate, so one could translate it as being very direct and to the point in person's identity. Being a bolt-action sniper rifle, it doesn't fire as much or as fast as an automatic weapon, which is fitting because Poet seldom speaks, and when she does, it's for very precise reasons. The other example is Kirkley, who carries an Italian Spas 15 for the bulk of the story. The fact that it's a shotgun kind of implies a blunt approach to problems, since shotguns are very devastating weapons at short range, and Kirkley has a preference for direct action. What makes the Spas 15 semi-unique, along with its predecessor, the Spas 12, is that it can switch from pump action for more powerful and controllable shots to semi-automatic firing for overwhelming firepower. So somebody who looks a little deeper into this might be able to use that as a metaphor for switching personalities, one that's controlled and patient, and the other that's just impulsive and wants to dish out problems for whoever or whatever has it coming. Beyond that, another reason for why I identify these weapons by name, and I had this discussion with another indie writer on Twitter, is because in my mind it paints a rather unique picture, to me at least, in the reader's head. Saying Spas 15 is much more descriptive than saying shotgun, because it'll prompt you to run a Google search for Spas 15 if you don't know what it is, and then you'll see images of it, and you might read up a slight bit of it on Wikipedia or something, then you know what that character is carrying. I mean, I can't stand generic things anyway, so that's something I do, even beyond just wanting to show, not tell, even though, well, what I'm doing sort of qualifies as both.
And right there you have it. I never thought of weapons having a personality. But now I see how you can match a weapon to the character as he did with Poet. Once he said that the GOL Sniper Magnum was very direct and to the point, I could have put that weapon in her hand without even knowing it was hers. McGraw also points out that with the popularity of first-person shooters and the ease that Google brings to research, one quick search and we know exactly what's in their hands. I'm just from an era of no Google search, so you kind of just fly by the seat of your pants while you're reading. I also asked McGraw, right off the bat we see how quickly characters can and do come and go. Have you ever been connected to a character to the point where it was difficult to write them out of the book?
Imagine being forced to execute a family member or loved one. You have a short answer, but a much more meaningful and detailed one is this. There are some characters that I weren't too terribly attached to because their roles in this survey were to serve as essentially meat, because I didn't want to kill significant characters right off at the start. In the dawn of the story, we're introduced to a group of 5 people, and only one dies right off the bat because, as you said, it's to show that nobody's safe in this apocalyptic world. It It would be a serious bummer and just poor writing to slaughter every single one of those characters, barring the lead character, because it's obvious that he and these other people he's been traveling with around post-apocalyptic England for an untold amount of time. Imagine how disappointing it would be to just axe them all off, or axe all of them, before learning about who they are beyond just what they look like and what their names are. If I killed Pack at the start, you wouldn't have learned that he has PTSD from disastrous combat deployment in the Middle East. If I killed Samantha from the start, she wouldn't have been able to be open with her feelings, among other things, with Kirkley. If I killed Poet from the start, you wouldn't have learned the implication that she's had a rather traumatic past and that that's why she doesn't speak a lot, and it just keeps going from there when you add additional characters like Hannah and her group of three. The saving grace with being an author is that you have free reign to explore characters' backgrounds in either prequels or sequels, which I've done and continue to do. It's because characters like them and a handful of others appear and stick around for a while that you learn about them, and then thus you grow more devastated when their day comes. There's one character that just broke my heart when I wrote her out of the book because it sent the protagonist into a spiraling depression and totally shattered his otherwise resolute and positive outlook in hopes of things getting better for the world and those he cares about. The longer you play with the character and develop their identities, it becomes harder to cut them loose when the story requires you to. I wouldn't want to write an apocalyptic story or horror story if either of them had more surviving named characters than victims, but at the same time, it makes it a bit difficult to figure out who gets to live and who gets to die. If a cast exceeding at least 15 or so named characters, only an extremely low number survive at the end, though I won't say any more beyond that.
And now for the big question. For Paul, we asked McGraw, what made you decide to forego chapter breaks?
Carelessness, just to give you another short answer with a longer explanation, but if you want a bit more beyond that, I will say that, admittedly, I just wasn't really thinking about that when I was writing Apocalypse of Wolves, but I did correct that mistake in its prequel, The Book of Hannah, and fine-tuned it in the confidentially titled, as for now, sequel to both. A friend of mine gave me so much grief about that and made a running jump to conclusions, assuming that the rest of the book sucked because of missing that one detail. And eventually I may go back in, release a revised edition of Apocalypse of Wolves to add in chapter breaks. At any rate, I hope it's not too terribly disruptive, but I view each consecutive novel as a learning curve and improve the next one drastically based on my personal analysis of the previous book, as well as any feedback I get from it. That's not to say I won't eventually go back and format Apocalypse of Wolves to quote-unquote modern standards, because it is where it began for me, and it's the basis for all my other currently released books.
Now, first off, McGraw refers to this as a mistake. And as Paul mentioned, they like to have the milestones. And I also like to have a milestone, but I never have a problem once I get into the story. Many authors use many different styles and change up grammar, for artistic purposes. For example, Charlie Houston has used many different formatting techniques, most notably using dashes for like 10 or 11 books instead of quotation marks. And I recently read a book called Sandman Slim by Richard Cordry, and he has no chapter breaks. And I'll be honest, I think that made me not put the book down as much. Because like Paul said, it's a milestone, so you get to chapter 3, and you put it down, and then the next day you pick it up and do like 4, 5, and 6. Whereas I had no idea where I was, and I just kept reading until I couldn't read anymore. His best advice, though, was not to dwell on and use the feedback as a learning tool for the next novel. He brings up possibly going back and re-editing Apocalypse of Wolves. And we here at Indie Beginning agree. If there's just something gnawing at you in your first edition, don't be afraid to go back and make another edition. Just make sure with every story that you write, every short story, every long form story, you're just a little bit better than you were before. Every book is a learning experience. Stephen King's first novel, I'm not even sure he ever published it, but it wasn't perfect. Just keep pushing forward and just keep learning and keep doing a little bit better. As always, we asked our author, what is the one thing that you wish you knew about being an indie author when you first headed down this path?
The answer isn't something negative, actually, that there's a thriving community of indie writers on places like Twitter and probably Facebook as well. It's like an extended family of sorts. Twitter nowadays is more or less a battlefield between warring political parties, but this hidden treasure trove of kind, supporting, intelligent, and funny people is hidden there and communicates like some sort of underground guild using special hashtags. If you guys don't know where to find it, just post about your work and try using hashtags like #amwriting. I'm thankful that I began writing because even though my career is moving at about the same pace as a glacier with arthritis, I've made some wonderful friends. And as a matter of fact, without one of them and a previous guest on Indie Beginning, we wouldn't even be having this interview. Huge shout out to former Indie Beginning guest and fellow author Paul Grover, the guy who tipped me off to Indie Beginning and a great person across the board.
And here I wasn't expecting this answer, but it's perfect. We have gained so many friends and family, quite honestly, through this. Indie Beginning was created because of the community of people that were with Marie while Marie was going through our Charming Nightmare process. And it's going to go slow. I mean, not all great things go off like fireworks. Just remember, a glacier with arthritis created all of the Great Lakes. Ravage: Apocalypse of Wolves is available on Amazon. Remember to leave a review for this story, as well as all of the stories you read. Reviews are such an important way to support an author, and they only cost but a few moments of your time. In fact, reviews help podcasters as well. As a self-funded podcast, there really isn't money left over for advertising. Your reviews, word of mouth, and love of books is what keeps Indie Beginning running. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast platform. You can also find us on social media. All comments and reviews left each week will be discussed on the next episode. All reviews used in this episode were taken from Amazon, Goodreads, or one of our Indie Beginning pages. Music found in this episode was written and performed by Jazar, entitled Look Inside. If you are an indie author and would like to hear your story featured on the Indie Beginning podcast, go to acmbooks.com/submit for more info. I am your host, Benjamin Frankie, asking everyone to read more books, be the best possible you, and to simply enjoy this wonderful life. Thanks for listening.